The morning sun filtered through the blinds of my office, casting long streaks of light across the polished wooden desk. I sat there, staring at the screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. The numbers on the spreadsheet blurred as my mind wandered. It had been a long night, and the weight of what I was about to do pressed heavily on my chest. The phone buzzed, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was Sarah, my assistant. "Isabella, he's here," she said, her voice low and urgent. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Send him in." The door opened and James strode in, his usual swagger intact. His tailored suit was immaculate, his tie perfectly knotted. But I could see the faint shadows under his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands. He had been up all night, just like me. But for very different reasons. "Isabella," he said, his voice dripping with false charm. "To what do I owe this early morning summons?" I leaned back in my chair, studying him. My brother. My rival. The man who had been slowly tearing apart everything our parents had built. "Sit down, James," I said, my voice calm but firm. He hesitated for a moment, then took the seat across from me, crossing his legs casually. But I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw clenched ever so slightly. "I assume this is about the Peterson contract," he said, his tone light, as if we were discussing the weather. I nodded. "Among other things." He smirked. "You always were the cautious one, Isabella. Always worrying about the details. But sometimes you have to take risks to get ahead. Is that what you call it? Taking risks?" I asked, my voice sharpening. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks more like sabotage." His smirk faltered, just for a moment. But he recovered quickly, leaning forward, his eyes narrowing. "Careful, Isabella. You're treading on thin ice." I met his gaze, unflinching. "Am I? Or are you?" The room fell silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioner, the distant sound of phones ringing in the office outside. But in here, it was just the two of us, locked in a battle of wills. Finally, James broke the silence. "What do you want, Isabella?" I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the desk. "I want to know why, James. Why are you doing this? Why are you trying to destroy everything our parents worked so hard to build?" He laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Destroy? I'm not destroying anything. I'm making this company stronger. You're just too blind to see it." "Stronger," I repeated, my voice rising. "By stealing from us? By undermining our contracts? By funneling money into shell companies? That's not strength, James. That's greed. That's betrayal." His face darkened, and he slammed his hand on the desk. "You have no idea what you're talking about. You think you're so smart, so perfect. But you're just a puppet, Isabella. A pawn in Dad's game. Well, I'm done playing by his rules." I stood up, my hands gripping the edge of the desk. "This isn't a game, James. This is our family's legacy. And I won't let you destroy it." He stood too, his face inches from mine. "You think you can stop me? You're nothing without Dad. You always have been." I felt the sting of his words, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I reached for the folder on my desk and slid it across to him. "Take a look, James. Tell me if I'm still nothing." He hesitated, then opened the folder. His eyes scanned the documents, his face growing paler with each page. Finally, he looked up at me, his expression a mix of shock and fury. "You've been spying on me?" he spat. "I've been protecting this company," I corrected. "Something you should have been doing." He threw the folder on the desk, the papers scattering. "This is bullshit. You can't prove any of this." "Actually, we can," Sarah said, stepping into the room. She held a tablet in her hands, her expression calm but determined. "Every email, every transaction, every meeting. It's all documented." James turned to her, his eyes blazing. "You stay out of this, Sarah. This is between me and my sister." "No, James," I said, my voice steady. "This is about the company. About our family. And you've crossed a line." He laughed again, but there was no humor in it. "You think you've won, don't you? You think you can just waltz in here and take everything from me?" "I didn't take anything, James," I said, my voice soft but firm. "You did this to yourself. Every lie, every scheme, every betrayal. It was your choice. I just made sure we had the proof. He stared at me, his chest heaving, his fists clenched. For a moment, I thought he might lunge at me. But then, something in his eyes changed. The anger faded, replaced by something else. Fear. Desperation. "Isabella, please," he said, his voice cracking. "You don't understand. I need this. I need the money. I made promises, gambling debts. I can't lose everything." I felt a pang of sympathy, but I pushed it aside. "You should have thought of that before you started stealing from us." He sank into the chair, his head in his hands. "What are you going to do?" I sat down across from him, my expression grim. "The board meets tomorrow. They'll decide your fate." He looked up at me, his eyes pleading. "You can't do this. I'm your brother. And you tried to destroy our family," I said, my voice cold. "You left me no choice." The room fell silent again, the weight of my words hanging in the air. James looked broken, defeated. But I knew better. This wasn't over. Not yet. "I'll fight this," he said, his voice low. "You think you've won, but you haven't. Not yet." I leaned back in my chair, my eyes never leaving his. "We'll see, James. We'll see." The next morning, the boardroom was tense. The sunlight streaming through the windows did little to lighten the mood as the board members filed in, their faces grim. James arrived last, flanked by his lawyer. He looked like he hadn't slept, his usual confidence replaced by a hollow shell of the man he once was. Dad sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. He had flown in from Tokyo the night before, and the fatigue was evident in the lines on his face. But his eyes were sharp, focused. "Let's begin," he said, his voice cold. Sarah presented the evidence, her voice steady and precise. The financial records, the fraudulent transactions, the backdoor deals, all laid out in damning detail. James's lawyer tried to object, but the chairman silenced him with a glance. "Mr. Torres," the chairman said, fixing James with a steely stare. "Do you deny attempting to transfer $2 million from company accounts without authorization?" James leaned forward, his well-practiced smile faltering. "This is a misunderstanding. As a director, I was simply reallocating resources to offshore accounts." Sarah cut in, pulling up the wire transfer records. "Through shell companies you created." James's attorney whispered urgently in his ear, but James waved him off. "Isabella is twisting this. Manipulating the situation. She's always been jealous of my position here." I chuckled softly, shaking my head. Even now, he couldn't help himself. "Your position?" Eleanor Chin, the board's longest-serving member, raised an eyebrow. "In the past year, how many client meetings have you attended? How many projects have you overseen?" "I focus on strategic planning," James said quickly. "Then let's talk about your strategy," I said, nodding to Sarah. She pulled up a new document on the screen. "These are the plans you pitched to investors for your new company. Recognize anything?" The board members leaned in, studying the business model, an exact replica of Torres Technology Solutions, complete with stolen client lists and intellectual property. James's face drained of color. "That was theoretical. Radical. This is theft." "From the company," Dad interrupted, his voice like steel. "From your own family." "Dad, please." James turned to him, desperate now. "Isabella is setting me up. She's always had it up for me." "Enough." Dad slammed his fist on the table. "The board will vote now." The next hour felt like a slow-motion collapse. One by one, the board members reviewed the evidence, asked questions, and raised their hands. James grew paler with each vote. By unanimous decision, the chairman announced, "James Torres is hereby removed from his position as director, effective immediately. Furthermore, we recommend full legal action to recover misappropriated funds and safeguard company assets." James shot to his feet. "You can't do this. This company is my birthright." Dad's expression was unreadable. "No, James. This company is a legacy. One you tried to destroy." Security stepped forward to escort him out. He turned to me, his face contorted with fury. "You think you've won? You have no idea what's coming. One phone call, and I can burn this place to the ground. I met his glare calmly. You mean your deals with Comtech? Your backdoor negotiations with our competitors? I held up my phone. I just spoke with them this morning. They were very interested to hear about your strategic planning. The last bit of color drained from his face. How did you? I told you, James, I said, my voice cold. Always check your math. Security led him away, his protests echoing down the hallway. The board members filed out, leaving only me, Sarah, and Dad. He sat in silence, staring at the documents spread before him. I should have seen it, he said finally. I should have seen what he was becoming. Dad, no, I started, but he held up a hand. Let me finish, he said, his voice heavy. You saw it. You tried to warn me. Instead, I dismissed you. Just like he did. Called you overcautious. Said you needed to think bigger. Sarah quietly gathered her papers and slipped out, leaving us alone. You were protecting the company, I said. Just like Mom taught me. He smiled sadly. She always said you had her instincts. I should have listened. My phone buzzed, an urgent message from security. My stomach sank. Dad, James just tried to access our servers remotely. He had a backup plan. Dad sat up, suddenly alert. How bad? I let out a slow breath. Not bad at all. Because I had a backup plan too. I pulled up the network monitoring system. Flashing red alerts filled the screen, each one a failed attempt, blocked by the security protocols I had quietly installed months ago. He's trying to leak confidential data, I said. Client lists, financials, trade secrets. But every file he's touching is a honeypot, tagged, traced, and tied directly to him. Dad watched the screen, realization dawning. You didn't just protect us from his theft. You protected us from his revenge. Every move he makes now just gives us more evidence, I said. My phone rang. It was James. I put him on speaker. Having trouble? I asked. What did you do? He snarled. None of your codes work? I said, my voice calm. They were never your codes. The real server access changed months ago. You've been playing in a sandbox system, built specifically for this moment. There was a long silence on the other end. Still think I'm useless? I asked. The call cut off. Dad looked at me, a mix of pride and regret in his eyes. The board wants to name you CEO after I step down next month, he said. Dad, you don't have to. Yes, I do, he said firmly. It's time. You've more than proved yourself. He pulled me into a hug, the first in years. Your mother would be proud. My phone buzzed again. Sarah this time. Isabella, James just showed up in the lobby. He's demanding to see your father. And he's not alone. I stiffened. Who's with him? James Chun. And they're both smiling. A chill ran through me. James Chun, Dad's closest friend, our biggest investor. If Marcus had convinced him. Time for one last chess move? Dad asked. I exhaled slowly, already pulling up my next file. Actually, I've been saving this one. James thought he had one last card to play. But in business, like in chess, the quiet ones always plan several moves ahead. And I've been planning this one for a long, long time. The lobby of Torres Technology Solutions buzzed with nervous energy as James and James Chun strolled through the glass doors. Employees averted their gazes, but the tension was palpable. My brother's earlier fury had morphed into something more dangerous, confidence. Mr. Chin, I greeted them at the elevator, keeping my voice neutral. This is unexpected. James Chin, ever composed in his tailored suit, offered a polite nod. Isabella, always a pleasure. Though I wish the circumstances were better. They're about to get much better, James interjected, smirking. Where's Dad? He needs to hear this. I led them to the conference room, where Dad waited alongside Sarah and our legal team. The morning's golden light had given way to gathering storm clouds, casting shadows across the room. James, Dad stood, his tone guarded. What brings you here? Richard, Chin replied, his voice measured. I've come to discuss some troubling claims James has shared with me about the company's direction. About today's board meeting. James leaned in. Tell them, James. About your voting shares. About how you'll pull your investment if they insist on pushing these absurd allegations. I watched in silence. Years ago, James Chin had mentored me, teaching me the nuances of international markets. Now, he would meet my gaze. Richard, Chin began, choosing his words carefully. I've known you for 30 years. When you started this company, I was your first investor. I believed in your vision. He hesitated, then glanced at James. But your son has shown me documents that suggest mismanagement. Internal power struggles. Dad's expression darkened. James, whatever James has told you. Actually, I interrupted, my tone deceptively light. I'd love to hear more about the documents. The ones you showed Miss Sturgeon last night at the Golden Palace restaurant, right? James blinked. How did you know where we met? I allowed myself a small smile. The same way I knew you'd go to him. The same way I knew exactly which lies you'd tell. I tapped my phone, and the room's display screen flickered to life. Mr. Chen, would you like to see what really happened to your investment? Security footage played, James in his office late at night, manipulating financial reports. Another clip showed him sitting across from Chen's competitors, sliding confidential documents across the table. James sought you out because he knew your reputation for loyalty, I continued. He counted on your friendship with Dad. But did he mention his deals with Comtech? How he planned to use your credibility to prop up his new venture after gutting ours? Chen's eyes narrowed as the real documents filled the screen, each one unraveling James's scheme in brutal detail. James, Marcus sputtered. She's twisting. Be quiet, Chen snapped, his patience gone. He turned to me, and this time, he held my gaze. You knew he would come to me. I knew he'd try to use you, I corrected. Just like he's used everyone else. The difference is, I respect you too much to let him succeed. Dad stepped forward. James, I had no idea he would drag you into this. No, Chen agreed. You didn't. But your daughter did. He reached into his briefcase and withdrew a folder. Which is why she contacted me 3 weeks ago with all of this evidence. Why she asked me to play along when James inevitably reached out. James stiffened. What? You really thought, I asked, that I wouldn't protect every relationship this company has? That I wouldn't anticipate every desperate move you'd make? His face drained of color. You set me up. No, James, I said softly. You set yourself up. I just made sure everyone could see it. Chin placed the folder on the table. These are the transfer papers for my shares, as we discussed, Isabella. They'll be moved into the company's treasury. My investment stays, but under new leadership. James lunged for the folder, but security was already moving. He thrashed, his voice rising in fury. You can't do this. This company is mine. It's my birthright. Birthright? I stood, finally letting my anger show. You think being born into this family gave you the right to destroy it? This company isn't a birthright, James. It's a responsibility. One you never understood. Take him out, Dad ordered. As James was dragged away, still shouting threats, Dad turned to Chen. James, I don't know what to say. Say you let your daughter lead this company into the future, Chen replied. She's proven she knows how to protect what matters. The storm outside broke as Chen left, rain streaking the windows, thunder rolling across the skyline. What happens now? Dad asked quietly. Now, I said, we rebuild. Stronger than before. My phone buzzed, a message from James, sent from his lawyer's office. You'll regret this. Family is supposed to protect each other. I showed Dad. He read it, his expression heavy with regret. He still doesn't understand, does he? No, I said. He doesn't understand that I did protect my family. I protected everything that matters, our company, our legacy, our future. Dad squeezed my shoulder. Your mother would be proud. And so am I. That evening, as the storm cleared, I sat in my new office, the CEO's office. The view of Manhattan stretched before me, city lights shimmering in the dusk. On my desk sat 2 framed photos, one of Mom at her desk years ago, the other of Dad cutting the ribbon at our first office. Sarah knocked, stepping inside. The last of the documentation. James's access is revoked, all accounts secured, and the legal team is ready to proceed. And the Peterson contract? I asked. She smiled. Signed and delivered. Turns out they value integrity. I nodded. James had always called me useless, believing strength meant bold moves and loud declarations. He never realized that true power works quietly, building foundations strong enough to withstand any storm. What do you think he'll do next? Sarah asked. Try something else, eventually, I replied. But we'll be ready. We always are. As the last light faded, I thought about legacy, not the kind you inherit, but the kind you build. Mom had built systems to protect what mattered. Dad had built relationships that endured. And I had built something too, a shield strong enough to defend it all. James had believed his birthright made him untouchable. Instead, he had learned what I had always known, that real strength isn't in what you're given. It's in what you protect. And if he ever tried again, he'd find the same quiet strength waiting for him. Some lessons, after all, are worth teaching more than once.